Welcome back to Between Two FARS. Today, Bob Tepfer and I are talking about one of our favorite subjects, debriefings. I'm Warnicki Miller, here once again with the legendary king of procurement here at Johnson Space Center. Bob, let's continue our discussion about debriefings. We said that we like to give offerers as much information as possible about the consensus findings prior to the debriefing. But how much time prior to the debriefing should they get it?
Okay, I personally believe that I would give it to them when they sit down and not until, because we give them probably more than any other organization. We've had a lot of compliments that, wow, we get a lot of meaningful information, helps them do better proposals, helps explain the equities of the situation from the standpoint of this was why the decision was made. We don't say that, but that's what it demonstrates. And if you give it to them too much in advance, in fact, if you give it to them a day in advance, you end up with a lot of questions, many of which kind of does damage to the whole atmosphere at the time, because you start out by saying, I'm not going to debate each one of those findings. I'm not going to go in to the logic of the finding itself, because the finding speaks to it. It says what it was.
Now let me give you a hypothetical. Yeah. They don't have an attorney in the room at the debriefing, but what's to stop them from contacting an attorney a day in advance, now that they have all this paperwork, and having the attorney write a bunch of questions?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what it encourages. And so you end up with effectively a bunch of interrogatories, and you start out by saying that this is how a debriefing will take place. It's a process issue, not a discussion of hypotheticals, not a reevaluation of the basis for the finding, or God forbid, the SSA's determination and the logic articulated in that. And when you do that, you end up with all these questions, which they paid good money to have somebody write, and you say, I'm not going to answer. And that smacks of, see, we told you wouldn't be open, we told you wouldn't make it meaningful, and it, it's bad atmosphere, as opposed to giving them all the findings, giving the source selection statement, and letting them examine it, and even going over them from the standpoint of you can read them, you can do whatever you want at that particular meeting. But the meeting is routinely like an hour and a half, and we have a lot of times in these debriefings when I try to stress to them, look, when you go in, you may only have an hour with the source selection authority. You may not explain the process again, because the source selection authority was there at the acquisition strategy. They've been there at subsequent meetings, and they don't need it reiterated again. And so they may flip to page 20 and go from there. I stress to the people doing the debriefing that they need to go over the process, because one, folks don't appreciate what it was. They don't appreciate our strict adherence to it, and it also takes time. If you take time explaining the process, you're not laying out findings necessarily that they will want to debate with you, but you're providing them, so it's meaningful, and it makes for a better debriefing in the end.
Now, you talked a little bit about they're generally an hour and a half. We've moved towards telling them before we even invite them to the briefing that it would be limited to an hour and a half, or sometimes if it's a small procurement, 45 minutes. What are some of the benefits of letting everybody know up front that it'll be time limited?
Well, it's part of the equity from the standpoint of this is what we said we would do, and now we're going to do it, as opposed to debating it later, like, is this adequate? I also stress to people, from a tactical standpoint, look, there's nothing better than a debriefing on a Friday afternoon when folks have to leave to catch the plane to get home to their families. If you want to sit there and start at noon on a Thursday, and they can go on and ask questions and get frustrated for hours, that's up to you, but I don't advise it.
It doesn't necessarily decrease our litigation risk or create good feelings between us and the offerers. I was on one debriefing where we talked about the importance of listening and giving them the opportunity to read the paperwork that we've given them and ask us questions. And so sometimes the offerers will caucus and then want to come back. We'll say, do you have any questions? They'll say, can you give us a couple of minutes? And we'll say, sure. The benefit of limiting it at the front end to an hour and a half is they will know that their caucus time is counting against that.
Yeah,
because
that's a great
I was
idea.
in a debriefing of that nature that lasted 4 hours. And that's why we started implementing the process of letting everybody know that there'll be a cap on the time limit.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I don't have a problem if they want to caucus and ask the question, although I realize that if it's a process debriefing, which it should be, that you may very well, and I stress that when they go out, that's where you're going to stay because that's what you said you would do and what the FAR directs you to do. But you know, in equity, I would think that they'd be entitled to get together and examine things and then discuss it. But giving them 24 hours, having a group of folks that you don't know looking at it, I think that's just giving fuel to the fire that there could be a real problem later.
Well, as we're wrapping up our debriefing discussion, let's talk about format. I think a lot of our discussion here presumes that there's going to be an in-person debriefing, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're in agreement that that's the ideal way to get people to see each other face to face and to sort of get that emotional, cathartic moment taken care of that will maybe decrease litigation risk. But that's not the reality. A lot of times because of travel issues, you might be doing it by video conference or teleconference, audio only. Can you talk about the pros and cons of audio versus video if you're in a situation where you can't do it in person?
Well, I think that audio, you can't, everybody reads body language. And everybody likes to know who's there. And, I ask that folks get the names and titles of the people that are going to come in advance and limit it to a certain number so you don't end up with a cast of thousands sitting out there.
I had one of those debriefings too.
Right. But the reality is when it's audio, you might think you know, but you really don't necessarily know. With regard to video, again, it's entirely possible to have folks off camera, and but at least you can theoretically tell who's in charge and read that. It's preferable. But I think the reality is a lot of small businesses can't afford to fly in a crowd of 6 or 7 people, put them up for the night, and then particularly they didn't win the contract, so they have to make some tough decisions. So I can certainly understand why that would occur, but it does create issues with a video. They may ask for the information to be given to them, and I would encourage people to fax them.
Fax them, Bob!
Fax them the information. From the standpoint, you want to send it by way of email? Yeah, I like a good fax. But anyway, maybe that's why I'm in the retirement phase of this thing.
All right, well, let's talk quickly about faxing information, because ideally we would like to see the people come into the room and we give them all the consensus findings as they enter the room. Now, if you're doing it by teleconference or video conference, you're going to have to electronically transmit that documentation beforehand.
Right.
I'll tell you what I usually recommend, and then you tell me what you would recommend. I say half an hour in advance, just so you have enough time to fix technical glitches if the email or the transmission is not going through. But even better than that, if you've got a video conferencing system where you can put up the documents during the debriefing and then provide them electronic copies afterwards.
That's fine with slides, but the reality is if you're going to give them the findings, which is what I argue in favor of, such that they feel like, wow, I got everything.
Yeah, okay.
You're not going to be able to put those up as easy.
True.
And you don't know where they want to, look at and when.
So how much earlier in advance of the meeting do you think we should send this?
I treat it exactly as I would if they were coming in.
Okay.
I would hand it to them.
Right,
so I would give it to them right
as
before
the meeting is starting?
Yeah.
Bob's even stricter than I am.
Oh yeah.